boss. Now everything I
My name is Rob Withagen. I'm co-founder and managing director for Asoko Insight. We're building Africa's largest platform for privately held company information. So essentially helping bridge the gap between the many great African companies we have on the continent and the corporates outside of Africa that are looking to engage with them, corporates and investors. Right now it's really difficult sitting in an office in New York to find about interesting growth companies in Lagos or even in more rural parts of Nigeria, but still they exist, and our mandate is to help bridge that gap essentially. So our structure is based on similar models that have been successful in other parts of the world. A company called Zawiya in the Middle East has been an influence. A company called Doodle, this part of the Atlantic, has been of influence, and we're essentially taking best practices from their business models and adapted that to an African context. Everything. So what we do is using technology to data mine and bring repositories of company information that exist in various parts of the continent onto one platform, and complement that by deploying local research teams to engage directly with African companies to help deepen the profiles or make the profiles more up to date, as we have been able to gather it from these publicly available sources. Now all that is leading to a database which is online accessible, which currently houses over 3,500 companies with in-depth profiles on each of those. So a description of what the companies do in detail, where they are located, how many employees they have, who's on their management team, the board of directors, what type of clients they do business with. In some cases we have an idea of what the financials of a company looks like. So really interesting data points that help a company, again, this part of the world, make a short list of potential export or potential clients or partners, distribution partners of goods and services, or an interesting investment opportunity for a PE or a VC fund. The biggest challenge, without a doubt, is people's initial resistance to share information on their company. We're operating with companies that are privately held, so are not necessarily used to making their information accessible to outside parties. And then that feeling of wanting to close the books is exacerbated in many African countries where government is often seen as one that just wants to raise taxes over a company rather than an entity that can actually help create a conducive business environment. So if Asoko comes and say, please can you share with us some information on what your financials look like, for example, the instant reaction we get is like, are you a government spy trying to see if my records are up to date? That whole mindset we're facing with on a daily basis. We've been around for 3 years, and luckily we've seen a change in that mindset. We've focused on the biggest companies in our focus countries first of all, to make sure that we have the big corporates on our database before tapping into their value chains, and that's helped. Like once a company like Dangote or Wando Oil in Nigeria is part of our database, companies that are working with them, smaller companies that are working with them, sort of have that stamp of approval from the bigger guys. So that's helped. And a second and much more impactful way of convincing companies that there is benefit in transparency is by showing actual benefits arising from the platform. So we've had investors from France, for example, that have found Ghanaian partners that they've invested multi-million dollars of funding into, showing that is occurring because of the transparency that these companies in Ghana have been willing to give us, is a huge incentive for other companies to also join that platform. And we're now, I just gave you the figure of 3,500. That's been our first push as far as us collecting the information is concerned. we're now in a position where additional companies are coming to us saying, listen, clearly this is something of interest. We'd like to have a chat and see what information is required for us to share and to become a part of your platform. So gradually we're seeing a change in the transparency mindset, which is really encouraging.
Everything.
For our organization, it's really it's a huge value add to employ people that obviously have an in-depth understanding of African markets, but also have an experience dealing with Western-based investors, or at least a non-African audience, and knowing how to mold the message and how to bring the investment opportunities that lie among these African companies in the right context. So people with an exposure to both worlds are of tremendous value to our growing business. And I think that that's a similar trend among many data companies that you see arising, because a lot of the data developments, as I mentioned earlier, are based on what has happened in other parts of the world. It's a model that is being brought to Africa right now, adapted to an African context, and can scale really fast. But if you have people that have an insight in how these things have developed in other parts of the world, and specifically what has gone wrong and what is necessary to adapt it to an African context, then you have a really, really strategic and strong HR component in your team, which obviously is very valuable.
Everything.
The vision really is to become the go-to provider of company information for anybody looking to engage with African companies, not just outside investors, also African companies themselves. A Kenyan exporter of tea looking for a distribution network in Nigeria will need us as much as a New York-based private equity investor is looking for investment opportunities in Mozambique. It's to become the Bloomberg of privately held companies in Africa, in a very short sentence. That's the vision.
Everything.